Recording in progress.
All right. Thank you for coming for Base Theory Day 2. In Day 1, we looked at the subjective or the intrinsic keynotes for base. We really looked at what the base is at a personal level and how we personally, subjectively experience it. I guess you could say we kind of approached base from the personality. And then for today, we're actually going to be looking at it from the other angle, which is interesting because these questions came up already yesterday, which I think is it's kind of why I don't like to do too many. I really like to focus completely on the talk I'm working on, because I notice that if I work on the next talk and the next, I sketch them out and I sketch out the outlines. But the more I work on them, the more questions I get asked about them. So I'll be on the first talk, but it's like I'm holding the second and third talk in my aura. So every question in the Q&A, I have to be like, we're actually going into this tomorrow. Great question, and we're going into this tomorrow. And it's because my aura, like I'm so excited to talk about it. People are picking up on that palpable excitement of that approach. So it was funny in our Q&A yesterday. And even Mike, he kept bringing up things from my talk today, so it was just interesting to see how that works as a generator. We really do build the Maya through our aura, through the information we have in our aura that people just pick up. And that's kind of part of what I'm trying to convey, really, is the information that I know about base, and also to absorb and pick up information others know. Because, of course, one of the things we learn about base is that we only ever have the same base every single life. And so being base 2, I will always, not only in this life, but in every one of my lives, experienced reality as base 2. And what this means, having experienced reality in such a limited way, is that there's not just the difference between the bases. There's the difference between the bases as described by a base 2 person. There's the difference in the bases as described by a base 3 person, and so on. And so I would say it would take a minimum of 5 teachers, it would take a minimum of a penta. And that really is kind of the ideal penta, the ideal 5 base penta, to actually be able to describe what it is that is going on here, to describe it from all five viewpoints. So yesterday we described it from the subjective viewpoint, and that is much easier to see personally. We used the example of base 5 really being the personality, and then base 5 being able to go into anything because it is space, because it is presence. And so being able to be present with the body, base 3. Being able to be present with the mind, base 2. Being able to be present with movement, base 1. And being able to be present with the design, to actually sit with the inner stream of images, that is base 4. And so as we looked at it from the subjective perspective, we were really able to see how in our own lives we go into the experience of different bases, regardless of what base we are. I'm base 2, so I am contributing to the totality by sort of enforcing what base 2 is here to enforce, right? I'm contributing to the totality as base 2, but each of us has all 5 bases. Well, today we're going to look from the macrocosmic, not the microcosmic. We're going to start at the exoteric and really look at bases as an evolutionary movement. So instead of looking at the bases as the fundamental building blocks of our personal Maya, our subjective Maya, our experience of reality, we're going to look at them as the necessary building blocks for the Maya as a totality, as a whole, and for the evolution of consciousness, really, and how it evolves. And we're going to see that it tells a story. And so these are new keynotes. We haven't seen these keynotes yet. I might have touched on them a little bit yesterday, but we weren't really looking at these are the dimensions, we could say. The dimension of reactivity, of integration, of objectivity, of progress. and of subjectivity. And each of these words is very deep, and it's really only through spending a lot of time with each base that it starts to make sense why they're called that. It really does take a while to emerge. Why is the base? I mean, I guess yesterday when we looked at base 1, we did kind of acknowledge that it's where no choice comes from. It's where basically, because there is no real action, that all activity is actually reaction. And so we get really not only no choice, but we also get the principle of how do we get to the movement and the reaction that is actually occurring, which is what we call strategy and authority. And for each type, whether you're reacting to emotional clarity, whether you're reacting to the spleen or to the ego's willpower or the G center or anything, whether you're reacting to sacral response, that the big problem, as we saw yesterday, is how far away the mind, base 2, is from base 1. That, as we looked at in the diagram yesterday, which really, I mean, base shows us why strategy and authority is needed. It shows us where that emerges from. It also shows us there's 2 paths there. That the mind is the farthest removed from movement, from base 1. And so base 2, being the principle of mind, and what integrates all of our experience together, the integrative, as we see here, cannot directly get to the reactive. We can't get in touch with the no choice of our reaction directly. That mind actually pauses time and is not directly in touch with movement. It only has 2 ways to get there, through the body or through the design. And so we kind of touched on that as well, and how we tend to conflate body and design, but they're actually quite different. And someone might say, well, yes, I took the cookie from the cookie jar without asking, but I just had a sacral response to that. Okay, but is that real, or was that just, I mean, because that's another interesting question about, okay, you're getting in touch with the reactivity through the body. You can also get in touch with it through the design, which is to say, through the inner stream of images, through the unconscious. And these are the kind of 2 paths, and we tend to conflate them and say, well, my body, my design. But really, these are the left and right hands of the mind, that the mind has access, and that it has no direct access to the movement. So, no direct access to the reaction. It's only the sort of secondary reporting of that reaction through the unconscious. My unconscious flared up. I was triggered. I had an attack. The not self, right? Or my body felt really uncomfortable there, and I felt really nervous, so I know I don't have emotional clarity. So it's the second-hand nature of the movement reporting back to the mind, in some sense. But interestingly, the personality can get directly to the movement. And we looked at some of these complexities yesterday. Well, from this perspective now, we're not going to look at how an individual can access such things. We're going to kind of look at the totality of how does the totality need these different fundamental dimensions, and even to see it as a story, as a sort of a sequence, where it all begins with base 1. And in some sense, we historically as humans have moved out of a base 1 era into a base 2 and beyond era. And we can see how there are certain eras of human history where certain bases predominate, because that is the sort of collective project at that time. But of course, this also gives us deep knowledge just into the workings of the Maya. And these keynotes are always quite mysterious. We have to figure them out. Movement is energy, and energy is creation. This is the double yang, the yang force. Creation is seeing. Seeing is landscape, and landscape is environment. It's such an interesting idea. I mean, it's really, it actually reminds me of Heidegger, who talks about, although he has more of a base 2 idea here, but he talks about how there will be these settlements, and that the settlements are really what are creating the landscape around them, that there's a sort of a creative activity of defining where the settlement is, and that's something that base 1 is really here to do, to define where we will settle. but also to keep moving. I mean, life is movement. We can see just at a fundamental level, what stops moving dies. And we also can see some very deep connection between what it is fundamentally to be alive and the visual system and being able to see, and especially landscape. Something that I've discussed with people is that oftentimes someone with landscape environment will confuse having a really beautiful view with a particular landscape. A mountains person will say it's an amazing view. A valleys person will say, I really need to see that vast expanse. Well, neither of those are about vision. I mean, even shores people, I really love the view. Well, we all love the view. City people love the view. They love looking out the windows of their apartment buildings. I mean, seeing is fundamental to life and to the fulfillment of the human spirit. And right here in base 1 is the answer to the mystery of why seeing is so important. I mean, what it actually does for us is that it's almost like you're on a road trip and you go, wow, that's so beautiful. And it can seem so contingent or coincidental until you realize that actually seeing a beautiful view, seeing a beautiful sunrise, a beautiful sunset, that's about 20% of what reality is all about. You know, it's right here. Because these are the 5 components of it. And I know that there are 6 keynotes, but the first one is not considered a component. The 5 components of movement are energy, creation, seeing, landscape, and environment. And that's something Ra points out as well, is that of the 6 keynotes, the first keynote is just it's kind of the master keynote, and then it has 5 components. So we actually have the 5 again, this 5-fold division. But we can see that these things work at many levels, and where yesterday we were looking at the subjective experience of movement, being in that sort of whirling dervish whirlpool dancing where you lose your identity and you lose your sense of self and all that's left is the movement, or all these situations where you lose the separation with others. Although, interestingly, it is movement that creates the separation, which is a base 2 keynote. So we can see that there is a sort of progressive, that was actually one of the questions in the Q&A yesterday, was does one lead to the next and the next? And yeah, it does. It absolutely does. And so we can just see at a really fundamental level, if we imagine the base 1 people at the beginning of the development of humanity, which, by the way, base 1 is pretty far from humanity, actually. I would say we start to really get civilization with base 2. Base 1 is more connected to life itself. But if we kind of imagine what base 1 was doing, they are really moving and saying, we can't stay here, let's move to the next place. Or maybe we even could stay here, but we don't want to. I mean, what is the point if we stop moving, we die? So this is nomadic life, but this is also, people have settled, but the base 1 says, okay, you settled there, great. We're going to go see where else to settle. We're going to go to somewhere we haven't been yet. We're going to go explore. We're going to see what's over the hill and see what's on the other side. And so really being in a world where everything's been discovered, it's hard for base 1 people. They need to delve to the inner realms and find new genres of music. And as we saw yesterday, the keynote is I Define, which is all about naming things, naming the Maya, giving it definition through differentiating it, and also measuring, that it really is allowing for there to be measurement. And it is interesting that it's really setting the stage for base 2, where that measurement is used for status and things like that. But base 1 is simply saying, let's define, here's the settlement, I call this Jonah Town. It's like putting their name on it in a way. It's the double yang, and it's really just here to discover and to name new things, but not necessarily to develop them. Ra calls this the breath of life, yang. And that yang moves. I mean, he really mentions that in the Big Bang, in the Bond 2, it's the yang that moved, that bumped into the yin, the immovable, the one that's staying there. And so the yang is what's moving and the yin is not. And the fundamental question is about where? Where am I? And movement creates separation, even though that's a base 2 keynote. It's interesting to see that the oneness meets the light, which is another base 2 keynote. And then there are two. Movement is fundamental to life, and as Ra puts it, well, we can't move so much anymore. I mean, even war, he called it a form of movement, of moving into different territories where they haven't been before. Base 1 saying, well, we're going to yang our way into this place, and we're going to yang into that place. And because war has become so difficult, we've replaced that. And we've become less nomadic and more sedentary. Now we have tourism, because there's still a fundamental human need to move and to go into different places. It gets seen as compulsive, that base 1, they get called compulsive, the compulsive scratchers, the compulsive pickers. And yeah, it's quite far from being human. It's the life force energy within the human. Ra compares it to a wriggling worm. I mean, it says, every parent can be horrified that their child has certain compulsions that indicate their sort of base 1 nature, regardless if they're base 1 or not. But of course, people who are base 1, you can never tell them, lie here, be still and relax. They're really trying to fulfill their purpose to define things, to measure, to learn about location, to establish where the settlements will be. And for people who are base 1 now, they still have this role in the totality of defining and of finding new areas, new genres, new things. I mean, Mike is base 1. Mike was here yesterday, and I remember when I first met him, and I would go into the bookstore where he was, and he was listening to really strange music. I mean, it sounded like a Japanese man talking in a low voice very rapidly with chimes and various kind of new age sounds, and then like engine sounds. And I asked him what it was, and he said it was Japanese car commercials from the early 90s. He had a collection of Japanese car commercials that he was listening to as a soundtrack. I mean, that's base 1. Like, what genre of music do you listen to? Japanese car commercials from the early 90s. I mean, that was what he was like, very meditative music for him. Probably actually helped him relax. So this brings us to base 2, and the movement from base 1 to base 2, these are both yang. I mean, this is yang and this is yang yin, which I guess you could say this is the difference between force in the service of force and cooperation in the service of force, yin in the service of yang. And so at a fundamental level, we can see that the yang doesn't really want to cooperate. They just want to compete in some sense, even with themselves. That they want to do what nobody's ever done before. They want to climb the mountain nobody's climbed. I mean, this is the pure yang principle that just wants to free climb and do something nobody else in the world's ever done before, and is not interested in cooperating or collaborating with anyone on any projects, because from the evolutionary perspective, what it's really here to do is to establish the new settlement. Once it's established it moves on. Right? It moves on. It's not here to accumulate or hold on to or grab anything there. Base 2 is the one that actually develops that settlement. And so it's yin in the service of yang, this yang-yin base, which is the combination of the two, one of the combinations of the two. And it's cooperation in the service of force, in the service of getting something done. So you can think of like FDR-style New Deal, let's all build a railroad together. Let's all cooperate for this huge yang undertaking. Let's all cooperate and build a big castle or build a big wall around our settlement. The yang isn't interested in doing that. I mean, it's interested in what it can do by itself and in trailblazing and going to new places. But the yang says, let's all cooperate together to actually do something worthwhile, and let's find our roles. That base 2 is all about role, and at the surface that comes out as profile. And here we have some interesting keynotes, the 6 components of evolution, 5 components rather. That evolution is gravity, what holds things together, That gravity is memory, that we have to remember things, we have to remember who helped us and who didn't, and keep track of it. I mean, the establishment of law. This settlement has rules. We remember what you did. You didn't help in the summer, therefore you don't get as much food in the winter. Things like that. The memory is taste. Taste is love, and love is light. And these are some very dense keynotes that are hard to tease out some of the meanings. But as we saw yesterday, taste has to do with judgment. And that love is the ultimate judgment of all. The judgment that the one you love is irreplaceable and that the other 7,999,000,000,000 people aren't going to compare, I love this one and not the other 8 million. And that is the ultimate judgment. It's the most judgmental of all. I have a taste for this one and not that one. And there are many, many ways of interpreting these densely packed keynotes. But ultimately, from our perspective today, rather than looking at base 2 from the bottom up as the role that we play and the sort of profile that helps us fulfill our purpose and so on, we're looking at it more from the evolutionary perspective of what was needed. After settlements happened, there needed to be the establishment of actual structures, of buildings, and this is where we get interiority. This is the mind. I mean, this is the involution of the outside. Taste is not like vision. You don't just look out and see. I mean, you're taking in the photons, sure, but by and large, you're pretty safe seeing things. If you taste the wrong thing, you could die. It's ingesting it into the body, taking something in deeply. So taste already is the movement of not being the pure yang that doesn't take anything in, but now it has yin that is penetrated by the outside and takes in from the outside and is vulnerable to the outside. And so develops interiority and develops shelter. And as it develops shelter, we get hierarchy. When we use that measurement from base 1 and now the measurement through separation, the base 2 keynote, we separate out into a hierarchy, and we actually have these envelopes, these shells that signify status. And this is fundamental. It's funny because before you learn base, you kind of may think of it that there's another world that's possible. And I'm not saying that we can't have a much more beautiful utopian world here. The correctness of each of these dimensions operating cleanly. But imagining a world without status, that's a base 1 vision where they eliminate the base 2. And it's not going to happen because if you eliminate any of the bases, the entire thing falls apart. Every possible world, right? It's kind of like Leibniz. He talks about the best of all possible worlds. And all possible worlds, no matter what, even at their best, are going to contain these dimensions because these are the fundamental aspects of what makes a world a world. And so when we think of these envelopes of becoming that wrap us, these, we think of clothing, for instance. Clothing is a status symbol. I guess there's 3 things. There's clothing, there's shelter, the home is a status symbol, and there's transportation. Transportation is a status symbol. And these are the 3 symbols of status, and that goes back to ancient times. Whether you were carried around on a blanket, or you had a horse or a camel, or you had a carriage, and whether you lived in the pyramid or the castle or the chieftain who had the largest, best shelter, and whether you wore the most beautiful animal furs or however it is. These are the trappings, these are the adornments. And wearing the clothing and having the shelter and having the transportation, we see it now in modern music videos and modern pop culture. It's about the cars and the house and the shoes and all of that. It's all right here. It hasn't really changed. And so people who say, well, how superficial these materialists and their status, and let's kind of imagine a world without status. I remember had a class with Gayatri Spivak, who famously wrote, "The subaltern does not speak," or it's basically about oppression. And so people in the class, when they had her come, were kind of like, well, she's a deconstructionist. She translated Jacques Derrida. She's very anti-hierarchical. So they said, when they introduced her, we have Gayatri Spivak, and here we've really taken her teachings to heart, and we don't have students and teachers. We simply are all one, with no difference in hierarchy. And then she took the mic and said, well, I really appreciate this, wonderful introduction, but I am here to teach. And there is a difference in students and teachers. And I'm not here to be a student. And in fact, I don't believe in an anti-hierarchical, she kind of clarified it all. Because there is a sort of a naive flattening, a naive flat ontology that says we should eradicate status at every state, at every possibility. And I think it's the base ones who say that, because base one is the most against status. But at a fundamental level, just as we need movement, we also need status. And I think base twos are probably also trying to eradicate base one by trying to get rid of all the movement and saying, stop interrupting. And we're trying to create stillness of a mental space so we can all, I'm a base two, and I know trying to make the world stop is one of the hardest things to do. It's pretty much impossible. And just minimizing the movement of the world as much as possible to maximize the ability to go into a still mental space where we can contemplate together without interruption is a big part of what base two is here to do. But it's a force that remains. It's base one is just continuing to move and move and move, and base two is reaching out and grabbing things as it goes, and then it's saying, okay, we've defined this place, we've settled, we've created a town, now we need to find our roles. Who's the mayor? Who's the baker? We need a ditch digger, we need a doctor, we need, it's really about finding the roles for everyone and fulfilling those roles, and then every role has a status, and where's the hierarchy of that status? And this is all of the adornment and the building on top of the location that base one has discovered. So base two is really how things fit together, and we've kind of moved on from the base one phase, and it's about what emerges from that base one phase. So it's about the what, not the where. The shelters, the interior world, the status, and holding on to the past, remembering, grabbing things as we're moving by. And it's also about resources. The yang wants to drive, but base two says, okay, but who's going to pay for the gas? It's about finding those resources. And while base one may be competing, base two is asking, what's our role in this competition? Like, what are we really doing here? But even base two is not enough. We've defined the new location, and then we've built something there, and we have our status, and we have our roles, and that's very important. Role confusion is actually one of the most chaotic things that there is. Clear division of labor is part of what base two is here to do, because when you don't have a division of labor, that's where you have conflict, that's where you have chaos. And so people who are afraid of hierarchy or who are afraid of division of labor end up with a lot of redundancies and a lot of competition with those they should be cooperating with. It's the base ones who say, I don't believe in hierarchy, I'm going to, we should end the division of labor, everyone should learn everything and so on, but it's really because they can't cooperate. They don't know how to cooperate. And if they could, so it's funny because they imagine that the hierarchies are competitive and are oppressive, but actually the hierarchy is a form of cooperation. That it's actually uncooperative to say, I won't accept my place in this hierarchy. I won't cooperate with the hierarchy. I'm going to do everything. That's the double yang, who they have their own personal problems in collaborating with others. So they imagine that the hierarchy is oppressive, when in fact the hierarchy is a form of collaboration that they're unable to enter into. And I've seen this again and again with, for instance, Marxists, of which I consider myself quite a leftist. I believe in universal basic income, all sorts of, obviously universal health care, ending world hunger. I'm about as left as it gets, politically speaking, and yet, having conversed with a great many leftists over the years, I see many confusions about how to implement leftist. I mean, I would implement leftist policy as a base too, which is to say, through hierarchies and through roles and through clearly defined divisions of labor, as opposed to a sort of anarcho-leftist base one approach, which just says, eliminate all hierarchies, flat ontology only, flat, and that to me is just basically refusing to cooperate and saying that there's an impossibility there of any sort of collaboration or cooperation. Because a flat ontology doesn't allow for unique relationships to emerge. It basically is about being solitary and doing your own thing and just moving into the new territories on your own. And that probably worked great for nomadic societies and for certain times in human history. That was probably what we needed. We needed that sort of, there is no leader, everyone is their own leader. I mean, we may return to that at some point as well, right? But you can see that at this point we were challenged with how do 10 million people coexist together in New York City and things like that. And of course, base two is not enough to coexist peacefully, because you can have status and you can have hierarchy, and people can be really, really pissed off about that. And so what we actually need is base three to keep things moving, or to keep things growing, to keep people happy. I mean, base one is moving, but it's going to run into a lot of resistance if they don't have base two people helping them and base three helping them and so on. All of the bases are needed so that each of the bases can function properly, that no base can really do it on its own. The others have to do their part as well. And so what is the part that base three does? It says, okay, we've settled, we've defined this new area, we've built, we've established roles, we have the bridge builder, and we have the well digger, and we have these different roles. But now what? People are fighting with each other. They're unhappy with their roles. They want a different role, but somebody else already has that role, doesn't want to give it up. And they're all competing with each other, and they're refusing to cooperate, to work together towards shared common goals. Well, this is now the yin-yin, and the yin-yin is cooperation in the service of cooperation. So we've moved from sort of competition for competition's sake to cooperation for cooperation's sake. And the primary ways this operates are through food and sex. And what they basically say is, I mean, this is the yin's great power over the yang. It's like, if we look at it as in terms of basic gender dichotomy, how the feminine has been oppressed and suppressed for so long by the patriarchy. What has the feminine principle done in response to that suppression is they've basically been able to survive through depotentiating or kind of removing the physical power, disarming the physical power of the male through what they've had available, which is anything that will keep the male happy in some sense. And I'm not saying that that's a good thing by any means. I mean, we're at a tremendous turning point in history where maybe it really is this return of the divine feminine and this moving towards base three and base four out of the earlier. But also, if you go back in history, you find that there were pre-patriarchal times as well, and there were these extended periods of matriarchy. Be that as it may, it's essentially the female response to the male competition, which is to essentially say, okay, you're about to kill each other. Well, instead of killing each other, let's all cooperate together. And then the male principle says, no, I'm trying to compete. I don't want to cooperate. So the female says, okay, but if you cooperate, you'll get food and sex. And these are the things, that, and it's not just food and sex, it's also comfort, it's also enjoyment, it's quality of life. It's basically like, we have the new area, we've settled there, but there's no quality of life yet. There's not really a quality of life. And so the base three can help people accept what their role is by saying, yes, it's true, your role is to dig ditches, but look, after you dig ditches, you get to have a nice drink and hang out with me, and I have a pretty smile, and we're going to laugh and talk, and you're going to enjoy your life. And so it's really the quality of life that is added to the social, this kind of social base. Like this is I guess we can almost call it the interpersonal, if we're adding that on to the social. Because base 2 is very social. It's all about status and how we interact with each other. But base 3 is now, let's add the quality of life and the interpersonal connection and the intimate connection. Not that base 2 doesn't have some intimacy. Obviously, taste is taking things in. But we see the keynotes here. Being is matter. And there's actually only 4 keynotes here, which is interesting. And some of these, Ra will now redouble matter. So he'll say, being is matter. Matter is matter. It's kind of funny. Matter is touch. Touch is sex. Sex is survival. And this is a funny, kind of a funny idea that we need. Yeah, are you base 3?
Well, I was just going to say, usually it says being is matter, and then matter is.
I've seen that as well, but it also sometimes will say matter is matter.
Mm-hmm.
So he did it a number of different ways. Sometimes he'll say matter is, which is another, that's a good point.
Which
that
is kind of base 3 thing, like I am.
Yeah, it's true.
Just
Just matter is.
Yeah.
It's like I don't need to qualify this. It's just the pure isness of matter, because it's also the objective, and so it's kind of like, it's almost like matter is isness, if we could put it that way. That's a great point. That's a great point. And that's related to touch, sex, and survival. And what an interesting combination here, right? And this is personal survival of the individual as well as the survival of the species, which requires reproduction, biological survival. And this is fully yin. The fully yang just wants to wriggle, to live, and the yin says we must take care of the life, we must eat. And we must have the personal survival of the body as well as the survival of the species. So if base 1 says where, base 2 says what, base 3 says when. How long do we have to make new arrangements to continue surviving before we cannot survive any longer? How long can this food last us, right? So these are the kind of fundamental questions that are also needed, and we can see how each of these building blocks, each of these pillars are needed, or we wouldn't survive and we wouldn't have this great development that they're all really leading up to. And it's also funny that base 2 is evolution, but base 4 is progress, and that they're different things. That evolution is the accumulation, but progress is the improvement, not just accumulating detritus, but actually making it better, as we'll see when we get to base 4. So the yin is concerned with the future. And something interesting that Ra has said is that this is perhaps why we have a stereotype of men simply looking for the short-term pleasure-seeking, but something Ra said is that correct bonding can only happen if there is a chance it will last 7 years. There must be at least a 50-50 chance it will make it 7 years to be open to sexuality in a correct way for the yin principle. So this might sound very old-fashioned and very prudish and conservative of Ra, but he actually does say that for women to be open to sex with men, there must be the possibility of a 7-year relationship with that man. And that, in his opinion, no woman, even a 59-6 or any of this would actually really be open to short-term sexuality with men. Now that, of course, sounds extremely conservative to our much more progressive ideals in Western society, but it's an interesting question, is that if you are looking to the future, and also that doesn't preclude many of the relationships where it's simply, there is at least the connection, the potential for a connection with that person for 7 years of friendship or something.
And as a base 3, it's about intimacy, not necessarily sex. The intimacy gets to last for the 7 years.
Comment from Brandy Jordan that it's as a base 3 herself, it's about intimacy, not necessarily sex. And so there has to be the potential for intimacy for 7 years of some kind. Like, even if sexuality is only occasional or not really fully part of it, it has to be someone that you can be open to having in your life in that way, and not someone that, whereas I think there's a male fantasy of the short-term sexual bond that doesn't necessarily have, or it's not even that they're not even thinking about that 7 years. It's much more just thinking of the double yang, going somewhere that's never been gone before, right? To conquer a new land or something like that, which are all of these old, very retrograde, kind of 1950s style male metaphors for sexuality, which really also, I mean, each of these things, they exist in the world, but also we shouldn't generalize, because a lot of men are not base one, and a lot of base one men aren't going to be, you know, and of course women can be base one, and we have all of these different complexities, so it's not as simple as all men or all women or anything like that. These are just kind of fundamental aspects of the Maya that certain people embody more than others. The second base is trying to convince the third base, look, I have this job, I have this status, while the third base is questioning, is that enough? Will that be enough for survival? And the third base is about collaboration and maintaining the continuity of the bloodline, and it's actually the yin principle that will respond most strongly in cases where their bloodline is threatened. I mean, look at the mother lion, things like that. And then we get to base 4, and base 4, the eldest daughter. This is the yin-yang, and the yin-yang base is no longer yang for yang's sake. It's no longer yin supporting yang, like working together to collaborate for a big, large-scale project. Nor is it yin for yin's sake, trying to keep things smoothly operating. It is now the yin being served by the yang. So the subjugation of the yang in service to the yin. And this is where we get to really the scariest base of all, and this is the one where people have the most discomfort with it. I mean, it's the base of ego, as we went into yesterday. People have a big problem with ego. And not just the personal ego, but the collective ego, the ego of humanity, the sense of humans at the top of the food chain, humans that, I mean, I was talking in the Q&A yesterday about how, given the option to save a rainforest from destruction or to end a considerable amount of world hunger, I would choose world hunger, which is showing the preferential treatment of the human over the other life forms on this planet, and how hard that can be for people to accept, that the human is not really here to have a symbiotic relationship with its environment, and that's because of base 4, the principle that prevents symbiosis, that says we're not really going to cooperate with the animal kingdom, that they're lower than us, right? And this whole idea of higher and lower is very hard for people to stomach. In fact, if we think of the ego and its relationship to the stomach and the heart, what it's really saying is, do you have the heart for it to be human? Do you have the stomach for it to eat other animals, to kill other animals? Do you have the stomach for living in a society that requires the mass destruction of nature? Can you stomach it? That's what the ego principle is challenging us to embrace. Not to say that we should gleefully go around burning down rainforests, but it's very hard. It's not easy to stomach what the human has to do to survive. It's not. So we see that this is the principle of design, and that design contains within it 5 components. Structure. Structure is progress. Progress is smelled. Smelling is life, and life is art. So this is where we get not the wriggling worm of life of base 1, but the structured life of modern life, of the artistry of life. In that it's about progress, and progress also leaves people in the dust. It leaves behind those that do not follow progress. There's a great skit in the great sketch comedy show, That Mitchell and Webb Look, where they're in Stone Age times, and it's 2 Stone Age people, and they're building these stone axes, and then a man comes saying, I've come to announce the Bronze Age. We have bronze. It's so much better than stone. You see, it's this and this and this. And he goes on about how good bronze is. And then the kind of one guy's like, but I chip stone. I'm a stone chipper. Oh, we have no use for you. And the other guy's like, well, I wrap the stone on sticks. you can now wrap bronze on sticks. Come with me. And that's how it is. It's like progress comes and it takes some of us and it leaves others behind. And that is also something we have to have the stomach for. It's not easy. I mean, this principle of ego. It's not easy for anyone and it can also come out in such a distorted way. That's what I want you to think about, is the clean versus the distorted way. The clean double masculine is some adventurer who wants to go explore. The dirty double masculine is the competitive who is continually trying to, fight against everyone all the time, right? The clean status and hierarchy is the clearly delineated roles where everyone works together to collaborate towards a shared common goal. The unclean version of that is the status symbols where they just care about how much their shoes cost and what their car is, and it's the pure superficiality of the hierarchy. And at each step, there's going to be a clean version of each of these dimensions. The clean version of the third base, which is simply making sure people's needs are met and making sure that people are able to collaborate, and that if they're not collaborating, kind of coaxing them into collaboration. The unclean version of that is going to be supporting the status quo and preventing change, because it's saying, hey, the most important thing is to maintain the status quo and put a plus sign on everything. And you're like, no, this is terrible. We're in an oppressive regime. And the base 3 is going, well, yeah, but look, you have good food and good sex, so just don't worry about it, right? So there's a clean and an unclean version of each one that is going to either operate correctly, which is what happens through type, really. Type is kind of the key to that. Or it's going to operate incorrectly and come out in a distorted way that hurts and hinders the human spirit and prevents the evolutionary process and prevents people from carrying out their roles here and fulfilling their purposes and all of those things. So 4, it's hard to imagine the clean version of base 4. But it's there, it's possible. It's just that base 4 is where we get, it's forced cooperation, right? If we think of yin as cooperation, base 2 is cooperating for a common goal, the yang. Base 3 is cooperating for cooperation's sake, the yin. And this is, I'm going to force you to cooperate. It's like, it's not even, we wouldn't even really call it, it's not generally even called cooperation. What it's usually called is oppression. Because what it's really doing is saying, we're going to force you to all get in line. We're going to force everyone into this room, and we're going to kill anyone who doesn't, and so on.
It sounds like the product, though, is like art, like architecture or a museum or something like that.
Yeah. Ashley says the product is art, architecture, museums. Sure, it's kind of maybe art like in a twisted horror movie where the person, uses the bodies of their victims to make the art or something like that.
But that's art that's only
or maybe all art also has all art has a trail of bodies.
Yeah.
Is a way of looking at it. Is there a comment?
Yeah, I relate each of these to quantum physics, and this one to me is after the cell has been created. Now there's individuation in the cell, and now it becomes the strongest metronome in the body. And it entrains the rest of the cells that are near it to either leave or get in line with the operation.
So Brandy says she equates this with quantum physics, where after the individuation of the cell, this operates like a metronome that then entrains the other cells to either leave or to get in line.
Right, because they've been individuated, say, as a heart cell or a pancreas cell, but if they're not operating as a pancreas cell,
I have to repeat your questions because it's not going to pick it up. So you're saying that it's either the heart cell or the pancreas cell, and it's going to divide and exclude. I actually see that as base 2. I see base 3 as more like, base 4 in this case, as forcing other cells, almost like a cancer that would force the others to be used for their own purposes.
2 is collapsing the wave function. 2 is taking.
Okay, let's table this. Yeah, we do Canadian. So okay. So in any case, I would see that metaphor more as base 2, because base 2 is all about finding the roles and separating and saying, well, who's good at this, who's good at that. And maybe we can, in the Q&A, I'd love for you to explain, maybe you can give us all, kind of just go through the bases from quantum physics. That would be a beautiful perspective to add to this. Base 4 is interesting because as forced cooperation, what it's really doing, I mean, this is the principle of ego that's saying that their way is right and that others' ways are wrong. And they can get really sneaky about it because through direct competition, yang-yang, they can be confronted on this. So base 4 does not simply say, my way is right and your way is wrong. What it does is it manipulates and sneakily designs systems in such a way that they get their way, but nobody even knows they're getting their way. So Ra says that base 4, if it's done its job correctly, will have designed things so subtly. They've designed their control systems so carefully that you're being controlled by them and you're doing what they want you to do and you don't even know you're doing it. And so it's a very subtle, sneaky, indirect way of competing with others. It's not direct competition that we get with yang-yang, which says, I'm stronger. No, I'm stronger. Well, let's find out who's stronger. Base 4 says, I designed this system so those two would fight and kill each other so I would come out on top. You know, it gets the two strong ones to fight so that it can be the last one standing when they've hindered each other, and so on. But I don't want to paint it in a negative light, because obviously this is the principle of progress. This is where we get new cars and new refrigerators and new iPhones. I mean, this is the world that we've designed, or that the base 4s have designed to be the way it is, which has so many great benefits. So many benefits. Forced cooperation, where the yin has the power to meet the yang. At a deep level, this tells us something interesting, which is that it's the yang that comes out of the form, not the yang going into the form. And we even see this in childbirth, where both yin and yang come from yin. But as a symbolic level, what Ra tells us is essentially that the yang principle must be grounded in the yin, that everything must emerge from the yin, that the sort of active principle, I mean, it's kind of like what James Alexander said in his talk the other day, which is, if you have the intention to be the passenger, you'll just be apathetic. But if the passenger emerges, that's something different. And that these things are meant to emerge out of the form. And this is about the yin taking advantage of the yang. So we get improvement. It's all about better cars, better refrigerators, better. This is about ordering and the principle of organizing things. That's where the real artistry is. The artist takes from their repertoire, from their bag of tricks, and they organize all of these things into the art. But we can just see that we've kind of moved from defining the new place, settling there, having our roles, getting along, and now what? Now we need progress. We can't just stay there, right? We need to actually develop it, to make it better, to improve it. But if this comes out cleanly, it's improving it by saying, hey, that old fence wasn't good, we're going to put in a new fence, or that old water supply wasn't good, we're going to dig a new well. But that's more of a base 2 thing. It's not really what base 4 is here to do, right? What base 4 does, I mean, I guess at its best, is designs a more efficient, more humane, more livable, I mean, continuing to improve quality of life, the way base 3 does. But base 3 is simply saying, we're going to improve quality of life through having our needs met. And base 4 says, well, that's very inefficient. Let's design a new system where we don't even need to have as many needs met, because we're not having as many difficulties that would require so much patching up. So this is kind of, you can see an affinity to the projector, probably in the old days to the manifester. And of course, one of the keynotes is manifestation, as we looked at yesterday for base 4. Not the keynotes of the exoteric, but of the microcosm. So in any case, base 4, we don't really see it usually out in the world in that exalted form. It's very rare for that clean base 4 energy, that clean ego energy. We saw it with Ra. He was base 4 and also had a defined ego and had that very clean ego energy of, here, so just a moment here. There we go. And such a clean way to initiate others and show them progress in their life and what could be improvements in their life, improvements in how they approach things, and to get them, he designed design, right? And he designed the whole system in such a way that would help people. And so we do see that clean base 4 frequency, but it's so rare. What we most often see is people who are obsessed with the Ubermensch, the Superman, and obsessed with eugenics and getting rid of the lesser. And that if we really want progress, we have to eradicate those who won't have progress. And it's really something that a lot of people don't have the stomach for. And of course, obviously, I'm not advocating that there's any need for these things. It's just part of the world and how the world works and how the Maya works is that there will be retrograde peoples who will be against progress. And I'm not some sort of, like I'm not warmongering. It's just this is a fact that there will be people left behind. And of course, there's a clean way to leave them behind, and then there's a really unclean way, which is concentration camps and forced labor camps. Like all sorts of oppression occurs because of the fourth base, and it's because the principle of ego ultimately says we're better than you, and we're right and you're wrong, and we're going to design things. I mean, we're either going to design things so that we send mass-scale troops in for war, or we're just going to impose economic embargoes, and we're going to, lower and diminish the quality of life of these places by design, and in a way that we can escape culpability even. I mean, the ultimate base 4 trick is to design things in such a way that they don't even get in trouble for it, because they've designed economic sanctions against people, and they've done all of this sort of Cold War stuff that... this is very cold. This is very dark. I'll put it that way. Ra calls it the darkest of the dark base. It's the ego of the totality, where we get the obsession with Superman, with Nietzsche's Ubermensch. And it's also where we get self-improvement. No religion here, no spirituality here. This is just about progress, being better. It's the base that says we're the best. And it's the vanity of humanity. It's not about being symbiotic, it's about being in control. Base 2, let's all cooperate towards a goal. Base 3, let's make sure everybody is getting their needs met, so they'll keep cooperating. Base 4, well, you're going to cooperate with me because we're controlling you without you even knowing you're being controlled. But yeah, this is where we have the heart to live with the totality, the stomach to live as a human among humans. I mean, can you live in a world where so many innocent people die? Can you live in a world where so much ecological destruction happens? And there are people who can't. But the reaction to imposed will is resistance. This has to be clean, or else it will meet resistance. It can't be imposed will, or it has to be designed in such a way that actually is beneficial. If Ra was just going around imposing his will through, human design, saying, this is the way it is, that's the way it is, and so on, he had to design it in such a way that actually did have benefit, that actually did create progress, that actually did embrace life, a life-affirming way. And obviously that is an art. And this brings us to base 5, the subjective base. And as we saw yesterday, the base keynotes combine to sort of create these. So each of the keynotes at the microcosm level are related. The keynotes from base 1 and base 2 combine, and then the keynotes of base 3 and base 4 combine at each level to create the base 5 keynote. And that was something really, really powerful that we saw yesterday. But what this is really about is communication. I mean, this is where we get 9-centered communion. This is where we get the ability to mutate. I mean, there's nothing, it's not standing on anything. There's a little bit of a parallel with the 5th line here, where it's getting things out to people. And so we can see that after we have done these other processes, and we've established society, and we've gotten a law, and we've designed our prisons and our schools and our laws and our stop signs, and all of that being the base 4 stuff. They design all the rules. And once we have all those rules in place, and we have this system that's operating, well, what's left? Communication and mutation. And you would think maybe the deepest mutative force would be base 1, because it seems so vital and close to life. but it's actually base 5, and it shows how we are able to mutate the other through our communication, and that there is a special connection between line 5 and the voice and its ability to communicate through voice, color 5 being an auditory encounter, tone 5 being feeling and sound. Well, base 5, right? Space is form is illusion, illusion is hearing is music, and music is freedom. So I love that, and this also shows where freedom actually is. That base 1 gives us no choice, but base 5, at the end, we've sort of recovered freedom, so we somehow have freedom within no choice. Well, as an illusion, but an illusion that works, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of an interesting thing of, oh yeah, there's freedom, it's just an illusion, but it's there. But it is also beyond illusion. It's realizing that when we say illusion, that's not to say it doesn't exist. That it's working with illusion. It's an illusion that operates, that functions. It's like this great quote from Slavoj Žižek in his film *The Pervert's Guide to Cinema*. He says, he shows the scene from The Matrix, where he says, if you take one pill, you go back to the regular world. If you take the blue pill, if you take the red pill, you're going to see behind the illusion. And he says, I want a third pill. I don't want to see the reality behind the illusion. I want to see the reality of the illusion itself, the reality that the illusion produces and how it operates in the world, and so on. So that's base 5. It's mutative because it doesn't stand on anything. It's an interactive field based on the other 4 dimensions. And it's ultimately about spreading things, just like how line 5 is trying to universalize and get things out there. And even spreading the common cold is a form of communication. It's spreading materials and so on. The distributor theme, the 5th line distributor. And this is where our problems are. They're in our subjectivity. It's the subjectivity that says relativism is the only truth, that everything is relative, that it's all just opinion, because subjectivity cannot stand dogma. And this is really where we have a problem. We have a problem in the personality. We saw that at the microcosmic level, that base 5's keynote is personality, that the personality has a problem, and its problem is it thinks everything is subjective, so it won't accept that there are objective realities and objective truths, and it has to sort of humble itself to learn, right? But it's very hard for it to learn. But as we saw yesterday, one of the keynotes of base 5 is type. And this is really key, that for it to operate correctly, one of the signposts for base 5 is whether it's living out its type. And if it's living out its type, this is the way to end the suffering of the personality. This is the surrender to the Maya, and this is what surrenders. And so we do have limited freedom. We've seen that no choice is also real, that it's in base 1. But there's another dimension where I won't say we have choice, but we have freedom, and that freedom is to surrender or not. Obviously, we're not mechanically surrendering. It's the personality that's surrendering. It's different, right? So base 1 is where we get the realization that there's no such thing as choice, because it's all just reaction. Base 5 is where we get the realization that despite the fact there's no choice, there is freedom to surrender or not. And that the freedom to surrender to the Maya changes everything. And I love that Ra would say, nothing really changes, it's all just a joke, there is no change. But then here's a quote from Ra, or I guess it's in a moment, where he does talk about what actually does change. It's the personality that changes. Every base makes an essential contribution to the totality. The program is designed so that we can slowly but surely fall into conscious participation with this contribution, that we can complete in a conscious state what our contribution is. And this last part is a direct quote from Ra. He says, word for word, that the program is designed so we can complete in a conscious state what our contribution is. This is the personality that changes, that has the freedom to change or not. Not by deciding, it doesn't have a choice whether it changes or not, right? But by awareness, by learning, by learning. So, when you embrace the Maya, when you understand how it works, everything changes. The Maya doesn't get in the way any longer. And here's the quote from everything about this fifth base is about bringing us to the theater of life and to the joy that the theater of life can bring us. These moment-by-moment scripts that were handed by the forces, these moment-by-moment shifts and directions and programming information and this conditioning and that conditioning and all the stuff that is going on. What are you doing fighting in all of that? There is an enormous waste of resources in battling all of that. It's just about accepting it. It's just about letting it be. And that's where we have freedom. We have the freedom to surrender to that and to accept it. Right. Let's take 5-10 minutes and come back and do a little Q&A. Thank you all.
Good job.
Thank you.